In a small, quiet village surrounded by endless fields and tall trees, a stray dog and his tiny puppy lived a simple but peaceful life. The villagers called the dog Buddy due to his friendly nature. With a thick coat of scruffy fur and eyes that held an unspoken warmth, Buddy had become a familiar face to the people in the village. He was especially protective of his young pup, who had only recently started to explore the world with wobbly, curious steps. Every day, Buddy led his puppy around their small territory, showing him where to find the tastiest scraps and the softest places to sleep under the shade. The villagers often watched them with smiles, sometimes leaving food for the two wanderers. It was a simple life, but they were content. The puppy, who the villagers playfully called Tiny, followed Buddy everywhere, his small legs struggling to keep up with his father's longer strides. One bright afternoon, Buddy took Tiny on a stroll near the train tracks that cut through the outskirts of the village. They usually stayed away from the tracks, but Tiny's boundless curiosity had started to grow as he discovered new sights and smells each day. As Buddy sniffed around for leftover food scraps near the market's edge, Tiny trotted off toward the tracks, his nose low to the ground, completely absorbed in the new scent he'd found. Suddenly, Buddy looked up and realized that Tiny was no longer at his side. His heart quickened, and he scanned the area frantically, his eyes finally locking onto the small figure near the steel rails. Tiny was closer to the tracks than ever before, his little paws edging dangerously close as he sniffed around, oblivious to the potential danger. Buddy barked, hoping to catch Tiny's attention and lure him back, but Tiny seemed lost in his own world. Buddy moved quickly, darting toward Tiny and barking louder, more urgently this time. But just as Buddy reached him, Tiny's small paw got wedged between two wooden slats of the railway. The puppy tried to pull himself free, whimpering, but his paw was stuck firmly. Panic filled his tiny eyes as he looked up at Buddy, who was now barking furiously, trying to pull Tiny's leg free with his teeth. The distant but unmistakable sound of a train horn echoed through the valley, growing louder with each passing second. Buddy's heart pounded as he realized the train was approaching, and fast. The usually serene tracks, where they had never before encountered a train, now seemed like the most terrifying place in the world. Buddy tugged at Tiny's leg with all his strength, his teeth gently gripping the fur and pulling, but Tiny's paw remained wedged. The puppy's cries mixed with Buddy's desperate barks, creating a distressing harmony that carried through the open field. Tiny's eyes were wide with fear, his small body trembling as he sensed the impending danger. Each passing second brought the train closer, and Buddy's frantic efforts became more desperate. He tried everything, nudging, pulling, barking as if someone might hear and come to their aid. But they were alone, and Buddy's instincts told him that time was slipping away. The familiar sounds of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of the trees were replaced by the growing, thunderous roar of the approaching train. Buddy looked around, his eyes darting in every direction, searching for anything or anyone who might help. But there was no one else on the desolate outskirts of the village. It was just him, Tiny, and the relentless train drawing closer with each heartbeat. Tiny's small body pressed against his father, seeking comfort, but Buddy knew he needed to keep trying no matter what. The train horn blared again, closer now, the ground beneath them trembling slightly as it approached. Buddy's heart ached with fear and frustration, but he was determined not to abandon Tiny. He could sense the final moments slipping away as the air filled with tension, the noise growing louder and drowning out every other sound. And then, just as Buddy was about to make one last desperate attempt, he caught a glimpse of movement in the distance. A shadow, a figure, moving through the trees, coming toward them at an incredible speed. Buddy's eyes locked onto the shadow in the distance. At first he couldn't make out what it was. The shape was large, moving swiftly between the trees, and it seemed to be coming directly toward them. For a fleeting moment, he hoped it might be one of the villagers coming to their rescue. But as the figure moved closer, Buddy's heart raced with both hope and fear. This was no human. It was another animal, large and powerful, bounding toward them with an urgency that was as fierce as Buddy's own desperation. As the figure stepped into the light, Buddy recognized it as a wolf. A gray wolf, with fur that gleamed under the sun and eyes that held an intensity Buddy had never seen before. The wolf was cautious but determined, his gaze fixed on the pair by the tracks. Normally, Buddy would have barked, warning any wild animal to keep its distance, but the fear of the approaching train overtook any instinct to protect himself. This was no ordinary moment. In a strange way, Buddy felt a flicker of trust. Something about the wolf's eyes told him they shared a common purpose. The train was now close enough that Buddy could feel the vibrations through the ground, each tremor sending waves of panic through him. Tiny whimpered, his paw still firmly stuck, his tiny body pressing against Buddy as if seeking protection from his father. With time running out, Buddy gave a single, pleading bark in the wolf's direction, a sound that seemed to carry all his hope and desperation. To Buddy's astonishment, the wolf responded. He approached them cautiously, yet with purpose, his movements fluid and calm despite the chaotic scene unfolding around them. Buddy took a step back, letting the wolf approach Tiny, though he kept his body tense, ready to protect his pup if needed. But the wolf simply examined Tiny's paw, assessing the situation with sharp, observant eyes. Without a moment's hesitation, the wolf lowered his head and gently grasped Tiny's paw in his powerful jaws. His teeth clamped down carefully, just enough to secure a grip but not enough to harm the puppy. Then with one swift pull, the wolf yanked Tiny's leg, attempting to dislodge it from the wooden slat. Tiny let out a small yelp, but Buddy sensed that the wolf knew what he was doing. The first attempt failed, Tiny's paw was still stuck. The wolf released Tiny's leg and adjusted his grip, trying a different angle, while Buddy watched, a mixture of fear and hope in his eyes. Every second felt like an eternity, with the train now so close that the ground shook continuously, and the deafening sound filled the air around them. Buddy let out a series of frantic barks, urging the wolf to hurry. The wolf shot him a quick glance, his eyes calm but resolute, as if assuring Buddy that he wouldn't give up. He pulled again, this time with a powerful twisting motion that finally freed Tiny's paw from the trap. Tiny stumbled backward, whimpering in pain but finally free. Buddy immediately nudged him, encouraging him to stand. But the train was now almost upon them, the blaring horn sounding like an alarm that shook Buddy to his core. There was no time to celebrate their small victory, they needed to move and fast. Without hesitation, the wolf barked, urging Buddy and Tiny to follow him off the tracks. Buddy didn't need further encouragement. He nudged Tiny, who hobbled, his little leg sore from being stuck, but determined to keep up. Together, the three of them, dog, pup, and wolf, began to run, pushing themselves to the limit to escape the oncoming train. But Tiny's small, injured legs slowed them down, and Buddy noticed that the wolf kept glancing back, aware that they were losing precious time. The train was a monstrous, unstoppable force, bearing down on them with each second. Buddy's heart pounded as he urged Tiny to go faster, but he could see that his pup was struggling, his tiny body not built for such intense exertion. Just when it seemed like they would be overtaken, the wolf made a split-second decision. He turned back, nudging Tiny gently but firmly with his nose, then positioning himself between Tiny and the train. In one swift motion, the wolf lifted Tiny by the scruff of his neck, carrying him with an unexpected gentleness for a creature of his size. Tiny hung from the wolf's jaws, his wide eyes staring back at Buddy in a mixture of confusion and trust. With Tiny safely in his grip, the wolf sprinted ahead, moving with a speed and grace that Buddy could hardly believe. Buddy ran alongside them, his gaze fixed on his pup, who was now out of harm's way thanks to the wolf's bravery. They reached the edge of the tracks just as the train thundered past, its deafening roar filling the air, blowing dirt and leaves in a whirlwind around them. Buddy and the wolf stopped, both panting heavily, watching as the enormous machine rushed by, oblivious to the lives it had nearly claimed. Tiny was trembling but safe, cradled in the wolf's jaws until the danger had fully passed. As the train disappeared into the distance, the wolf gently set Tiny down on the ground, stepping back to allow Buddy to approach his pup. Buddy nudged Tiny, checking him over for any injuries, his heart swelling with relief as he realized they had all survived. Turning back to the wolf, Buddy let out a soft, grateful bark, a sound filled with respect and appreciation. The wolf stood tall, his eyes meeting Buddy's with a calm acknowledgement, as if to say that no thanks were needed. It was a silent, mutual understanding, a connection that transcended the boundaries between domestic and wild, between caution and trust. In that moment, Buddy realized that they had been part of something extraordinary, a rescue born from desperation and bound by courage. The wolf, who could have easily ignored their plight, had chosen to step in, risking his own safety for a pup he had never met. The wolf gave one last lingering look at Buddy and Tiny before turning and walking back toward the trees, his form soon blending into the shadows of the forest. Buddy watched him go, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and awe for the unlikely hero who had appeared when they needed him most. The days that followed were filled with a mix of relief, exhaustion, and the struggle of Tiny's recovery. Buddy took on the role of vigilant caretaker, staying by his pup's side day and night. Tiny's leg, though not broken, was sore and swollen from being trapped, and he hobbled around slowly, still shaken from the terrifying experience. The villagers, who had always admired Buddy's loyalty to his puppy, began to notice that something was different. They saw Buddy and Tiny moving more slowly than usual, and the way Buddy's eyes held a lingering sadness, a reminder of the close brush with disaster. A few kind souls left extra scraps of food for the pair, sensing that they were in need of care. One elderly villager, an animal lover named Martha, took particular interest in Tiny's recovery. She brought bandages, ointments, and even made a small, soft bed for Tiny to rest on outside her home. Buddy seemed to understand that Martha's gentle touch was helping his pup, and he allowed her to tend to Tiny, watching intently as she treated the little paw that had been hurt. As the days passed, Tiny began to regain his playful energy, though he was more cautious now, never straying far from Buddy's side. It was as if he understood, in his small way, the depth of the danger he had escaped and the courage it had taken for Buddy, and their unexpected ally, the wolf, to save him. Tiny followed Buddy everywhere, his trust in his father stronger than ever. But for Buddy, one part of the story remained unresolved. He couldn't shake the memory of the wolf, the fierce yet gentle creature who had risked everything to save Tiny. In the quiet moments of the night, Buddy would gaze toward the dark line of trees beyond the village, wondering if he would ever see the wolf again, if he would ever get the chance to convey the gratitude he felt. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, Buddy's ears perked up. He sensed a presence, a familiar scent carried on the gentle evening breeze. Tiny, noticing his father's sudden stillness, tilted his head, following Buddy's gaze toward the edge of the forest. There, standing quietly, almost as if he had been waiting, was the wolf. He moved forward slowly, his steps careful and respectful, as if he understood that he was a visitor in Buddy's world. Buddy rose to his feet, his body tense with a mix of anticipation and awe. Tiny looked up at Buddy, unsure of how to react, but sensing the calm in his father's stance, he too remained still. The wolf approached them, stopping a few feet away. His eyes met Buddy's, and for a moment, there was complete silence, a quiet acknowledgement of what they had been through together. The bond between them was something that needed no words, a silent understanding that spoke of bravery, loyalty, and respect. Buddy took a step forward, lowering his head slightly in a gesture of gratitude. The wolf held his gaze, his expression as calm and steady as it had been during their rescue. He seemed to understand Buddy's silent thanks, and he responded with a gentle bow of his head, a graceful acknowledgement that he had done what he could for them. Tiny, seeing the exchange, took a hesitant step forward, his eyes wide with curiosity. He looked at the wolf, a mix of awe and gratitude in his gaze, recognizing the creature who had carried him from the path of danger. Tiny let out a small bark, soft and respectful, his way of expressing his thanks. The wolf's eyes softened, and he gave a low, rumbling sound in return, as if accepting Tiny's gesture. The three of them stood together in the fading light, a quiet, unlikely family forged by circumstance. Buddy felt a profound peace wash over him, knowing that his pup was safe and that the wolf, their savior, had returned one last time. It was a moment he would hold close, a memory etched deeply in his heart. After a few moments, the wolf turned, giving Buddy and Tiny one final look before he slipped back into the forest, his silhouette fading into the growing shadows. Buddy watched him go, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude, but also a sense of closure. He knew now that they would always be connected, even if they never saw each other again. With Tiny now fully healed and the memory of their shared bravery deeply cherished, Buddy turned back toward the village, leading his pup home. In the days that followed the miraculous rescue, Buddy and Tiny became local heroes in the village. Their story spread quickly, filling the hearts of villagers with awe and admiration for the loyal father dog, his tiny pup, and the mysterious wolf who had come to their aid in their time of need. Everywhere they went, people would stop to give Buddy and Tiny a pat on the head, an extra treat, or a kind word. But more than anything, there was a sense of quiet reverence around them, as if the animals had shown everyone a glimpse of something sacred. Children, captivated by the tale, would gather outside Martha's house in the evenings, hoping to hear the story again and again. Martha, the elderly villager who had nursed Tiny back to health, became the unofficial storyteller of their adventure. With a gentle smile, she would sit by the fire, surrounded by wide-eyed children and curious adults alike, recounting every detail as though it were a cherished legend passed down through generations. And there they were, Martha would say, her voice dropping to a whisper, caught on the tracks with a train rushing toward them. But just as all hope seemed lost, a great wolf appeared from the shadows, strong and fierce, but gentle as he carried little Tiny to safety. Her listeners gasped, clutching each other in suspense, even if they had heard the story many times before. To the children, the wolf became a figure of mystery and courage, a guardian spirit who protected the innocent. Some even began to leave small offerings by the forest edge, bits of food or flowers, as a sign of respect for the animal who had saved their beloved Buddy and Tiny. Touched by the tale, the village elders decided that such an act of bravery and kindness should be honored. They planned a ceremony to recognize the bond shared by Buddy, Tiny, and the wolf, a connection that transcended fear, species, and even instinct. They agreed to create a small monument, a lasting tribute, to remind everyone of the power of loyalty and the magic of unlikely alliances. As dusk fell on the appointed day, the entire village gathered near the forest path where the rescue had taken place. The air was filled with a sense of solemnity as villagers young and old, humans and animals alike, gathered with lit candles and small tokens of gratitude. Buddy and Tiny were guided to the front of the crowd, where a stone pillar, simple yet dignified, had been erected. The pillar was adorned with carvings of a dog, a pup, and a wolf, standing together as a symbol of unity and courage. Martha took her place beside the monument, her hands folded as she looked at the villagers gathered around her. Buddy and Tiny sat by her feet, Tiny peeking out from behind his father, his curiosity mixing with a sense of pride. Buddy's calm, steady gaze watched over the crowd, sensing that something important was about to happen. With a voice both gentle and commanding, Martha began to speak. "Tonight," she said, her voice carrying over the hushed audience, "we gather to honor a bond that goes beyond our understanding, a bond that reminds us of the courage within each of us, and the strength we find in each other." She looked down at Buddy and Tiny with a soft smile. Buddy, a father who would do anything to protect his pup. Tiny, who showed resilience beyond his size. And the wolf, an unexpected friend who risked everything to save them. She paused, allowing her words to sink in, and in the silence, the villagers could almost feel the spirit of the wolf watching from the edge of the forest, his presence lingering like a shadow in the trees. "In this world," Martha continued, "we are often taught to fear what we don't understand. But sometimes even those we fear can be our greatest protectors." As she spoke, Buddy lifted his head and gazed toward the forest, his keen eyes searching the shadows. It was as if he too was looking for the wolf, yearning to see his savior one more time. Beside him, Tiny followed his father's gaze, his small tail wagging slowly, sensing the gravity of the moment. One by one, villagers stepped forward to lay small gifts at the base of the monument, bouquets of wildflowers, pieces of cloth, and small carvings of animals, all tokens of respect and gratitude. A young boy approached Buddy and Tiny, holding a handmade charm on a leather cord, which he carefully placed around Tiny's neck. Tiny barked softly in appreciation, wagging his tail at the boy, who smiled shyly before stepping back into the crowd. The villagers continued to share their offerings, each one an expression of how deeply Buddy, Tiny, and the wolf's bravery had touched their lives. A young girl, her eyes shining with admiration, gently patted Buddy on the head. "Thank you for saving Tiny," she whispered, her words barely audible but full of warmth. As the final villager placed her offering, Martha raised her hands in a gesture of blessing. "May this monument remind us all," she said, "that heroes come in many forms. And may we never forget the courage it takes to love, protect, and forgive." The villagers nodded, their faces illuminated by the glow of their candles, united in a moment of shared respect. The ceremony ended as night fell, and the villagers dispersed slowly, leaving Buddy and Tiny alone by the monument. Buddy took one last look at the stone pillar, his heart swelling with gratitude, not only for the wolf but also for the village that had embraced them as family. Tiny nuzzled his father, letting out a contented sigh, and Buddy licked his pup's head, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. As they turned to leave, Buddy glanced back one last time toward the forest. He thought he saw a pair of eyes glinting in the darkness, watching them with a quiet, protective gaze. Whether it was the wolf or just a trick of the shadows, Buddy felt reassured. The connection they shared would endure, a silent, powerful bond that went beyond words. With Tiny trotting beside him, Buddy led his son home, leaving behind a legacy of courage and unity that would be remembered by the village for generations to come. Life in the village settled into a new rhythm, but the story of Buddy, Tiny, and the wolf had left an indelible mark. The monument near the forest became a cherished landmark, with villagers often pausing by it as they walked, placing fresh flowers or small tokens of remembrance. Children played nearby, pretending to be brave like Buddy or mysterious like the wolf, their laughter echoing through the trees. The spirit of that remarkable bond seemed woven into the very fabric of the village, a reminder that heroes sometimes come from unexpected places. Buddy and Tiny too carried on, returning to their daily routines and exploring the forest trails together. Buddy had grown even more protective of Tiny, keeping a watchful eye on his pup as they roamed. Tiny had become more adventurous and confident, often scampering ahead and then turning back to make sure his father was following. But even with their joyful routines, Buddy occasionally found himself glancing toward the dense line of trees, wondering if he'd ever see their savior again. One chilly autumn morning, Buddy and Tiny ventured a little further into the forest than usual, following a familiar path where Tiny liked to chase after leaves and sniff around the bushes. The trees were thick with the colors of fall, their leaves a tapestry of orange, yellow, and red, crunching softly under their paws. Buddy was alert as always, but he felt a strange sense of calm in the air, as if the forest were whispering secrets he couldn't quite understand. Suddenly, Tiny froze in his tracks, his ears perked and nose twitching. Buddy noticed his son's posture and immediately went on high alert, sniffing the air. There, in the distance, barely visible among the shadows of the trees, stood the familiar outline of a large, solitary figure. It was the wolf. He looked just as Buddy remembered, majestic, strong, and slightly otherworldly, his piercing eyes fixed on Buddy and Tiny with a calm, wise gaze. Buddy felt a rush of emotions, gratitude, awe, and perhaps a touch of fear, at seeing the wolf again. Tiny, however, was overjoyed. He barked excitedly and took a few steps forward, his tail wagging furiously. The wolf watched them with a gentle patience, unmoving as Buddy and Tiny approached. It was as if he had been waiting for them, his presence a quiet reassurance that he was still watching over them. As Buddy and Tiny drew closer, the wolf inclined his head in a respectful gesture, acknowledging Buddy. Buddy, in return, dipped his head, a silent exchange of gratitude and respect between two unlikely allies. Tiny approached the wolf eagerly, nuzzling him with an innocent affection that only a young pup could offer. The wolf accepted Tiny's attention, sniffing him gently as if to check on the pup's well-being. For a few precious moments, the three of them stood together in the heart of the forest, a family bound not by blood but by a shared experience that had transcended any natural instincts. The wolf and Buddy seemed to communicate in silence, understanding each other in a way that words could never capture. Buddy sensed the wolf's strength and kindness, his role as a protector not just of his own kind but of those who needed it most. Then, as if sensing that it was time to leave, the wolf straightened and looked at Tiny with one last affectionate glance. He turned to Buddy, his gaze lingering a moment longer, and then, with a grace that seemed almost ethereal, he disappeared back into the shadows of the forest. Buddy and Tiny stood still, watching until he was out of sight, feeling the emptiness left by his departure but also the comfort of knowing he was still out there, part of the forest, part of their lives. On their way back to the village, Buddy noticed that Tiny seemed unusually thoughtful, as if he, too, understood the significance of their encounter. They walked side by side in comfortable silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Buddy felt a deep sense of peace, grateful for the bond they shared not only with each other but with a creature who had once been a stranger and had become their guardian. When they reached the edge of the village, Martha was waiting for them, as if she somehow knew something special had happened. Tiny rushed to her, wagging his tail and barking excitedly, as if trying to tell her about the wolf. Martha knelt down, stroking his fur and looking up at Buddy with a knowing smile. She didn't need words to understand. She could see in Buddy's eyes that he had seen the wolf again. From that day on, Buddy and Tiny continued their walks through the forest, always feeling the wolf's presence nearby, even if they never saw him again. The monument became a place of quiet reflection for the villagers, a tribute to an extraordinary friendship that had defied fear and bridged the wild and the tame. Buddy knew that he and Tiny were not alone. They had an unspoken connection with the wolf, a bond that would last forever. And so, the legend of Buddy, Tiny, and the wolf lived on. The villagers told stories of the wise, brave wolf who had saved a father and his pup, and children grew up believing in the magic of friendship and courage. In their hearts, Buddy and Tiny carried the memory of the wolf, their silent protector, as they roamed the forest trails, unafraid and filled with gratitude. In the years that followed, the story of Buddy, Tiny, and the mysterious wolf became something of a legend within the village. It was whispered among adults at gatherings and told with excitement to children sitting around campfires. Over time, the tale evolved into a cherished part of the village's folklore, symbolizing the strength of friendship, loyalty, and the mysterious ways of the forest. Buddy and Tiny continued to roam the forest together, their bond growing stronger with each passing year. Tiny grew from a playful, curious pup into a sturdy, confident dog, his spirit shaped not only by his father's guidance but also by the memory of their wolf protector. Every so often, Tiny would pause in the middle of their walks, gazing into the depths of the forest as if searching for the friend who had once saved his life. One day, as Buddy and Tiny were making their way along a familiar forest path, they encountered a group of children from the village who were playing near the monument dedicated to the wolf. Seeing Buddy and Tiny approach, the children ran over, eager to pet them and hear the story once more. Martha, who had accompanied the children, smiled as she watched them gather around Buddy, asking questions about the wolf, their eyes wide with wonder. "Is it true?" one young boy asked. "Did the wolf really save Tiny?" Martha nodded, her face softening as she looked at Buddy and Tiny. "It's true. Some friends come into our lives in ways we never expect," she said. "And they leave a part of themselves with us even when they're gone." The children listened intently, enchanted by the story of courage and kindness. Buddy watched them with a gentle expression, feeling a sense of pride. He sensed that, through this tale, his bond with Tiny and the wolf would live on, even after he and Tiny were no longer here. As the years passed, Buddy grew older, his once strong frame becoming slower and more fragile. Tiny, now fully grown and protective of his father, took on the role of guardian during their walks, keeping close to Buddy and guiding him through the familiar trails. Their friendship had shifted as Buddy aged, but the love and loyalty between them had only deepened. Tiny had inherited Buddy's calm strength, his courage, and even his watchfulness, as if the qualities Buddy had gained from his encounter with the wolf had been passed on to his son. One crisp winter morning, Buddy led Tiny to a secluded part of the forest they hadn't visited in a long time. There, surrounded by the quiet beauty of snow-dusted trees, Buddy paused, looking around with a distant gaze. Tiny stayed close, sensing something significant in his father's demeanor. Buddy turned to Tiny, giving him a long, affectionate look as if to say, "This place, this moment, is for us to remember." As Buddy lay down in the snow, resting his tired body, Tiny nuzzled him, his warm breath clouding in the chilly air. They stayed like that for a while, father and son, enveloped by the tranquil silence of the forest. Buddy seemed content, a peaceful expression softening his old features, as if he knew this was where he belonged, surrounded by the forest he loved, with his loyal son by his side. In time, Buddy closed his eyes, leaving behind a legacy of strength, love, and bravery. Tiny sat beside him, feeling the weight of his father's absence but also a profound sense of peace. He knew that Buddy's spirit was not truly gone. It lived on in the forest, in the stories shared by the villagers, and most of all, in Tiny himself. After Buddy's passing, Tiny became a figure of quiet strength in the village, much like his father had been. The villagers often saw him wandering the forest trails, stopping by the monument where he would sit in silent remembrance. It was as though he too felt the spirit of the wolf watching over him, guiding him. As the years went on, the villagers continued to tell the tale of the wolf who had saved Buddy and Tiny, passing it down from one generation to the next. For the villagers, the story had become more than just an account of an extraordinary event. It was a reminder that love and courage could bridge any distance, that the connections we forge have the power to transcend life itself. And in the heart of the forest, where the trees whispered secrets and the air was filled with the scents of pine and earth, the legacy of a dog, his pup, and a wolf lived on, forever etched into the soul of the land.